Football at 4, Johnny Mack here on the Sports Bash. We talked some football last hour. I know you want to get some opinions from John on some of the things that we were throwing around. But first, before we get to some of that, John, Eagles signed veteran linebacker Zach Brown today. Give us some skinny on him, what you think his role might be, because if people aren't familiar, they might be just like, another special teams filler linebacker. Is Zach Brown, does he fit that mold?
No, I think he's a starting middle linebacker. Now, the question is, how much do you play two linebackers? How much do you play three? And how much dime do you play? So in the modern NFL, it's obviously a sub-package and certainly a two-down player, and that's what Zach is at this stage and certainly expected to be. It's a question of sort of giving Jim Schwartz options. And I think this is a significant upgrade, especially in this division, when you think about especially Dallas and Washington. And you think about Ezekiel Elliott and you think about Adrian Peterson. This is one of the better run-stuffing linebackers in football. I know people are going to say, what about Saquon Barkley? But he's a little bit different because he's more the modern running back who can do so many different things. So catch the ball, get outside, and do a lot of the more modern things that you think about when you think about 2019 NFL offenses. But for a two-down run stuffer, this guy's good. If he were in a different era, this would be really big. But it is what it is.
You know, John, the first thing I thought when I saw that they signed him was, now it being May, is that this is basically the linebacker version of the LeGarrette Blount signing 2 years ago. A good, steady player that adds depth that they really needed at that position, that can start, probably be here for 1 year, but will play a small but significant role.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, in this division, probably more than most divisions because of the running backs, and especially late in the weather in the Northeast at times. So maybe it gets a little bit more important as the season gets later and later. But it was also an obvious need position as well, in the fact that the Eagles obviously did what they did in the draft and traded up for Andre Dillard and didn't have as many draft picks as they expected they were going to have. And Howie Roseman mentioned after the draft, talent acquisition season hasn't ended, and he's lived up to that this week. Zach, the bigger signing, obviously, but even getting a safety in off waivers as well. This team needed some help in the back seven. And this is a pretty significant signing, especially at this time of the year. Mm-hmm. And Jeff, this team has been known for it. If you think about LeGarrette Blount when he came in, think about when Chris Long and when he was signed. This team tends to do this. After the draft, they look at the obvious needs, and they go out and get the best players available.
Yeah. One thing, John, that also seems to stand out is that I feel like, in looking at it now in retrospect, that Howie and Joe and the personnel people probably went into this offseason saying we're probably going to lose Jordan Hicks, and we're probably not going to be in position to draft a linebacker high. We don't value it, and we're not going to get one of those two top ones. So we're not going to be able to get another three-down linebacker, but what we can do is get linebackers who have skill sets that match what we need to do on specific downs. So you've got now Zach Brown, who can give you that first and second rundown, and the kid who I'm a little bit intrigued by is L.J. Fort, who had a good year last year for the Steelers and earned, not just promoted because of injury, but earned playing time as a coverage linebacker specifically by playing well in Pittsburgh. He's a guy that might be one of your nickel linebackers when Zach comes off and you don't go to dime and bring in more back. So you just have Zach for one and LJ for another instead of having Jordan Hicks to do it all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, the plan. I think with LJ, it is going to be a legit competition with Camus, and who's ever the better coverage linebacker, that's the one that'll be on the field in the nickel, as you mentioned. And Zach will be the starting middle linebacker. The interesting part is, obviously, I think maybe a little bit too inside baseball is the communication part of it, because generally you think middle linebacker. He's got the green dot on his helmet, but that will continue to be Nigel Bradham, because he's going to be the one linebacker on the field no matter what. And so it's a little bit different, but the game is changing. And you bring in players to handle certain roles. It's great to find a three-down linebacker. I think if you look at that position as a whole around the league, people say it's been devalued, and it has to a large degree, but not for those three-down guys. The NFL really, really respects those types of players that can be on the field every single down, but they're few and far between. So you got to cobble it together from there, and that's what the Eagles are doing.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot this week, John, about the defensive line and the depth there and how that is going to play. Linebacker's been a spot where they haven't had a lot of depth the last couple of years. Now, when Hicks went out, you can give some credit to some of the guys who have stepped into that spot, but it was always a spot where you kind of questioned their depth. Now, my question really is, does Schwartz want to play with less linebackers, or does he play it because they didn't have the depth there?
He wants to play with two linebackers in the nickel, and he doesn't want to go to dime unless he has to. And that you've seen that with Jordan's injuries over the past 2 years. He kind of defaults to Malcolm at the end. It seems always Malcolm's the guy who ultimately saves the day. And his versatility is a very underrated part of this defense. But I just remember, if you go back 2 years and Jordan being injured during the Super Bowl year, and you had Nigel suspended at the beginning of last year. And I remember specifically asking Jim, this is the first time you've had these two guys together in a really, really long time, with Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham. And he compared it to getting his fastball back. That's, Jim, with baseball analogies, but that's what he feels is the best way to move forward, is to have two linebackers on the field, and especially two guys who can be three-down linebackers. But as I said, that's not always the easiest thing in the world to do.
It's funny, the one thing that we haven't talked about per se, but probably now needs to be on the radar a little bit, is the idea that Nigel Bradham was more like what Nigel Bradham was as a player before he got to the Eagles last year, like a good player, but who could struggle in certain situations. And you and I know, we talked about it a lot during the show, during the season, he was not the same guy he was in 2017. And if age or whatever makes him even lesser of a linebacker this year coming up, well, then they kind of still have real linebacker issues, because then it's like you don't even know who the best linebacker is. But he really had a very poor game in the playoffs against New Orleans, and you got to hope that he comes back a little bit more, a little bit more like the 2017 version, if that's possible.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still look at this and say this is a clear weakness of this team. I don't think Nigel is one of those guys. When you look around this league and start talking about the best three-down linebackers, I don't think Nigel Bradham, even at his height, belongs in that category.
Right.
I think he's a good player when he's playing well, and it's a player who understands his role and has been with Jim Schwartz a long time, including back in Buffalo. And so he understands his defense, and it's a situation where Jim's very comfortable with him. But, yeah, I think if you're looking at obvious deficiencies of this team, I think linebacker's one of them. And when Nigel Bradham is your best linebacker, you still need improvement at that position. I think that's fair to say.
John McMullen, Football at 4, as the Eagles make a signing today. Zach Brown, and he was with the Redskins, for the people out there who are wondering who he is and where he came from. He was with the Redskins there. And Bradham, he signed that deal. He had that really big year, and then he signed the deal. And I guess we all kind of say, he didn't have nearly as good of a year. That's another area. We talked a lot, John, draft and stuff. This draft was important because they have so many guys that are getting older that maybe the draft picks like Dillard aren't going to play this year, but soon enough, and you wonder how many more years they can even really rely on Bradham to be an every down player like they kind of been using him.
Yeah, he's in that category. And, I mean, Zach immediately enters into it. He'll be 30 in October, I believe. So they have a lot of older players, older obviously in the realm of the NFL. But that we kind of talked about that a few days ago. I think that speaks to the reality that this team, and I agree with them, they believe the window's open. So it is time to get players like Zach Brown. And maybe it is the next incarnation of the LeGarrette Blunts and the Chris Longs of the world, where you plug in veteran players knowing you're close to the finish line and you're going for it. The Eagles are still in that mode. I think next year that mode changes because you're going to finally have the Carson Wentz extension. And you're right. I think if you look at the 3 picks in the top 57, I think the Eagles, whether they admit it or not, and they're not going to say it publicly because they don't want to upset Alshon Jeffrey, for instance, but they expect Andre Dillard, Miles Sanders, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. They expect all of those players to be starters in the 2020 season.
Speaking of starters, John, I wanted to ask you about defensive line because I had this thought the other day that it doesn't make sense when I say it, but when I think about how it works out, I think it does. They bring in Malik Jackson, who is known as a pass rushing tackle and was benched last year in Jacksonville for being, I guess, a liability in run defense. And then they bring back Tim Jernigan, who post-back surgery has not been the same player, but still a decent enough one that they're trying to build back. Tim was the run-stuffing D-tackle when they went to the Super Bowl. He came off the field. We know about their NASCAR package that didn't include him. If Malik Jackson is a better pass rusher than run stuffer, I know they paid him a lot of money, but does it make sense to maybe start Tim Jernigan and Cox on first down, second down, and bring Jackson off the bench so that you're not playing him 70% of the snaps like you do with Fletch or most of the snaps, and you're really only capitalizing on what his strength is?
Yeah, Mike and I talked about that a couple days ago. I think at times that's going to happen, and that's the reason why. You're going to have a rotation system. So the question is, how are you going to work the rotation?
I don't know. That's what I've been trying to figure out.
Yeah, and that's one of the options is that Tim can play on early downs and Malik could come in on later down, at least on occasion. Or you could do it, obviously, just rotate them every 3 or 4 series or so. That's another option.
Right.
But there's no question. I mean, he can't play 90% of the snaps, as you mentioned. Fletcher plays too many snaps, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And they would like to get that number down a little bit. So that's one way to do it, is to have Tim Jernigan handle rundowns and Malik come in and be the pass rusher, since that's their plan, is to have Malik Jackson on the field in the nickel package, in the NASCAR package, which, by the way, I disagree with it. I think that's hey, this team has been great with Chris Long as an edge rusher. I don't know why you mess with that unless you saw something I didn't see. Now, you acknowledge Chris is 34 years old, but, man, he played at a high level over the past 2 years with those limited snaps. No doubt. And I think they're better with Chris Long rushing from the edge and Brandon Graham kicking inside, at least on paper, than with just keeping Brandon Graham at left end and putting Malik Jackson in at defensive tackle. They obviously think differently. I don't get it.
Yeah, and, Jeff, you had mentioned about do you think John and I talked about this Wednesday, but do you think that Long is not coming back?
I think he's not coming back. Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking John.
No, John said he doesn't think he's coming back. I was asking you.
He went on Twitter and basically said he told the team to operate as if he's not going to be there. And the only way he would be there is if he felt he was going to play as many snaps as last year. But he said that the team told him that role is not there for him anymore.
Right. Now,
so I can't see any.
John and I both kind of
he's waiting for somebody to get hurt to think that he can come back.
That's exactly what John said. Is he's almost wishing for an injury, but not.
Chris behind the scenes as well does not like that, and he does not want to root for somebody to get injured, for lack of a better word.
Right.
He's not coming back, and unless somebody gets injured in August and they say, look, we desperately need you, then he would revisit it. But he's certainly not hoping it. And I don't know why the Eagles put him in this position. That's what I was trying to say, because I don't think they're a better team with their current plan. And that's all it is, because it's May. It's a plan.
What's interesting is the currency that Howie and the team have earned since winning the Super Bowl with the fans, because in the bigger picture, they've lost 2 of their top 3 pass rushers from last year, if you add Michael Bennett in, and both of them were basically their decisions. Let's trade one and tell the other that he's got no role here anymore. And no one seems to be upset about it.
Yeah, and I think it's strange from this standpoint. Look, you might say that. I mean, this league is brutal on players as they age, and it is what it is. It's a meritocracy, and you lose your job. But I would have went about it and said, no, Chris, that's your role. Mm-hmm. And then if you get to the summer and it starts saying, you know what, Malik's really good, then you say, hey, we're shifting gears. I mean, it happens all the time in this league. You move on from veteran players. Mm-hmm. Now you could say the Eagles are doing Chris a solid and being above board with them. But this is about winning games. And I think you have an opportunity to say, well, if that works out the way you think it's going to be, you still would have had Chris here. He still would have had that role, and maybe he decides to retire in the summer. Why pull the plug so early? I think it's a bad decision.
We know that Chris, I guess, is open to playing if somebody else reaches out to him and gives him a role that he wants?
I don't see it happen, only because, remember, before he came here, he won a Super Bowl with the Patriots, and you would think, well, he was thrilled about it, and he certainly was thrilled about winning the ring after all those years with a bad Rams team. But he was not happy, and he was not happy because he did not have the role that he liked. So for him, the role is more important than anything. And then at this stage, I do think he sees the difference between those bad Rams teams versus the Patriots and Eagles. He would want to be on a contender. So it's a very, very small group. And then you add the role into it. I just don't see where there would be a fit elsewhere. So I think it's Eagles or nothing for him.
He's got to,
and it's probably going to be nothing.
Cleveland's got to call him, right? I mean, that's the team that's got to call him. Every team that he's on wins the Super Bowl. So if you're Cleveland, it's Super Bowl or bust. You got to call Chris Long. Although they told Greedy Williams to tone it down with all his Super Bowl talk.
Well, remember, Chris played a long time and didn't win a lot of games. So it's not like he had a big impact on the Eagles Super Bowl, no question about it. He won with the Patriots. But he played a lot of years before he get to that position.
Right. I almost think Kansas City would be a good spot. They just transitioned to a 4-3. They could use a few pass rushers.
You wonder if Detroit, too, with Patricia out there.
Yeah, but why would he go to a place? I think he wants to go to a place that
wants to win, right? But I'm just trying to get connections for him because.
But he hated playing in New England because they played him out of position.
He didn't like playing with the New England system. So Patricia wouldn't be a great fit.
Detroit
it would be more of a. Yeah, Kansas City with Spagnuolo, and that would be more of a fit. But they've done significant things on the edges now after making the moves from Justin Houston and Dee Ford. So I don't see a fit. I really don't. I think it's the Eagles or nothing, and he's told the Eagles to prepare like he's not coming back. So I think he's going to retire.
All right, John McMullen, Football at 4 at JF McMullen. As, of course, the mini camp next Friday. Is it next Friday? Or 2 Fridays?
Rookie mini camp. Yes, next Friday.
Can't wait.